For the fourth consecutive year, the Edmonton Oilers have defeated the LA Kings in order to advance to the second round. Welcome to the panel presented by Sportsnet. I'm Paige Martin, joined by Bob Stauffer and Jack Michaels. And guys, before we focus on the second round and what's ahead for the Edmonton Oilers, let's talk about the first round, because we knew that it was going to be a great series. We talked about how it would be different than the previous 3 years, and it certainly was. What did you take away from what the Edmonton Oilers brought against the LA Kings?
Well, I'm not so sure it was that different than some of the other series, only because LA, had its chances. LA really, the only time the Kings were outclassed, I thought, was the 23-24 campaign, where I didn't really feel it was going to be all that competitive. Kopitar scored a winner in overtime in Game 2, and LA then played a really solid Game 4, and Stuart Skinner responded with probably his best game of last year's postseason run in shutting out the Kings in Game 4. But outside of that, it was kind of a foregone conclusion, especially with the way Edmonton dominated its special teams, that they were going to win last year's series. But the Oilers rallied from 3 games to 2 down in 22 to beat LA. And that was an LA team that missed some key people, but still had an opportunity to close out the Oilers on home ice. And then in 23, the Kings were up 2 games to 1, 3-0 in Game 4. And Edmonton looked really like they were in serious trouble, dug themselves out of it. So I don't mean to contradict you, but I would say this, that even when the Kings had advantages in this series, there was a confidence exhibited by Edmonton and a lack thereof exhibited by LA that I think played a role in this result. The other thing I think occurred is that Edmonton won 4 in a row for the first time since mid-January. I don't think it's any coincidence that they dressed the same lineup 4 in a row for the first time since mid-December. The one thing that was markedly different from the previous 3 years is we didn't know what kind of team Edmonton was going to have, Paige. That was the big difference that we all talked about. And once Edmonton got the pieces in place that they wanted to roll with, specifically Frederick and Kane, once they got rolling, I think Edmonton's relentlessness wore LA down, especially because of the manner in which the Kings deployed some of their key personnel through the first 5 games of this series.
I guess what I'll clarify is the fact that heading into the series, and especially with the season that the LA Kings had on home ice, how good they were, there was a little bit of outside noise saying maybe the LA Kings are favored this time.
Oh, it was more than outside noise. I think the majority of the experts out there had the Kings winning the series. There's a couple key stats I look to when evaluating teams, and one is goal differential. And LA had a really good close to the year in the final quarter of the year and finished, like at plus 44. And the Oilers, frankly, to win 48 games and have the same amount of wins as LA with a plus 23 goal differential, that's a bit of a statistical anomaly. Now, there's a lot of discussion. How good were the Kings really? There is another stat that I use, and that's road record. And the Kings had a great home record, but they had a sub-500 road record.
Only team in the West.
Only team in the West.
Below 500 on the road.
That made the playoffs.
Yeah.
So, that was, and they went 0 for 3 in Edmonton. And you can argue they found a way to lose 2 games, or you can argue that the Oilers found a way to win those 2 games. Because I'm going to exclude Game 6. I think that the Oilers.
But LA played a role in Edmonton taking those games in Games 3 and 4.
Yeah, and
I think from that point forward, the Oilers kind of dictated 5 and 6.
I think Edmonton got exasperated in Game 2 and a little bit undisciplined. There were some interesting numbers in the series. Normally when a team has the puck 33% more than the opposition team in the offensive zone, you'd have the balance of the power plays. The Oilers did not in the series. Atypically in this series, as Jack alluded to, the Oilers didn't dominate special teams, though in the final 3 games of the series, the Oilers' special teams were better than LA. And the Oilers continue to trend of being better in games 4, 5, and 6, and 7 than they are in the first 3 games of the series. They're 11-19 since the start of the 22 playoffs in the opening 3 games of the series, and they're now 22-7 in games 4 through 7. So Edmonton, and I've had this conversation with people around the league, and they're like, well, sometimes skilled teams need to work their way into the series a bit, understand that their skills got to match the will of the opposition team. At the end of the day, I think you got to give the Oilers credit. They picked themselves up off the mat. They were on the ropes a couple times, and they found a way to get it done. And in the process, as Jack alluded to, Chris Knobloch rolled over 4 lines and got a lot of players involved, and that bodes well because their next opponent is a heck of a lot deeper than the LA Kings.
The other thing I'd say, Paige, is I don't think sitting around in San Jose, the lull between series. If you think about where Edmonton's problems have been this year, going into the season, didn't have a great camp, coming off an off season of upheaval. I don't think we're particularly ready to go, despite some 5-on-5 metrics. I'm sorry, you lose 6-0 on opening night. You get off to an 0-3 start. I don't care how the metrics look. You probably weren't ready to go for the start of the season. Then there was another lull after the Four Nations break. And then again, it's just the vagaries of the schedule, but there was an extra day. They were already on the road in San Jose. And I just think an older team, bigger bodied, and you heard Evander Kane allude to it. The way the regular season finished, maybe we weren't quite up to playoff mode. What he's really talking about is those older engines and those bigger engines need to get going. And Kane and Frederick in particularly needed a couple games to acclimate themselves to the dressing room, to the game speed, to their own bodies and their limitations, and figure out what kind of game they were going to be able to play. And I think that's the only concern I have heading into this series, is if there is an extra day or two, I don't necessarily think it favors Edmonton, not based upon the balance of their work. The one thing I do like is they'll have the same personnel. They've now played 4 games together, and for the first time in my memory, maybe my 15 years in Edmonton, they've got an agitator on all 4 lines with Perry, Kane, Frederick, and Podkolzin. 4 guys that are extremely unpopular in opposing dressing rooms. And I think that adds an air of relentlessness to the game that Edmonton has previously lacked. And it's not just the minutes that the opposition has to play against them. It's the extra energy they spend riding those guys away from their goaltender, the pushing, the shoving, the scrums. All that seems to be all of a sudden a strength of Edmonton's, where before Bob and I did games together for years, we'd say you got to stay out of that. Now I think it actually benefits the Oilers.
So let's build on that a little bit, because a big storyline throughout the LA Kings series was the fact that Edmonton had their depth contributing. Of course, they did have Evander Kane and Trent Frederick healthy in the lineup, ready to go. You have guys like Connor Brown, Matthias Janmark, who are stepping up in big ways. In what ways do they need that to transfer over when we do look at now a different beast in the Vegas Golden Knights?
Yeah, I think we'll see when we have the full practice. It would not surprise me if they split up Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. But speaking of the depth, I mean, the Oilers had 9 different players in the series against LA score at least 2 goals. And in the final 2 games, where they scored a combined total of 9 goals, Connor and Leon didn't score a goal. You know, they
had 3 points, and 2 of them was on an empty netter, and they won a low-scoring game and a high-scoring game.
So they got more offensive juice going. Back to some numbers. 2 years ago when they played Vegas in the playoffs, the Oilers had the best shooting percentage in the NHL during the regular season, and they had the best, and they led the league in goals for. This year, because of how the season ended, and they ended up the last 14 games, wasn't one game where both Connor and Leon were in their lineup. Their power play, for the first time in 6 years, dropped below 25%. Their shooting percentage dropped to 25th in the league. Their power play finished like 11th in the league. That's very atypical for Edmonton. And I think they're back in a better place right now because they are healthier. And I think it bodes well. I think 2 years ago, Jack, you look at, Bukestad and Costin had big contributions in games 5 and 6 against the LA Kings, but we didn't hear a lot of them against Vegas. The Oilers are going to need that. They're going to need some support scoring from a Kane, a Frederick chipping in, a Connor Brown, a Janmark, who was playing through some injuries 2 years ago. They're going to need those guys to help support the McDavid and Draisaitl, because again, they're playing in my opinion, a way deeper team in the Vegas Golden Knights.
So do we think, dating back 2 years ago, how much does the history of this team add an extra chip on the shoulder of the Edmonton Oilers, knowing that this is the same team that bumped them out of the playoffs, went on to win the Stanley Cup? Does that have relevance?
I think there's a couple ways you can look at it. I don't think you can say that, Edmonton has a mental edge against Los Angeles because they've beaten them the 3 previous years, but somehow against Vegas, they'll be more motivated because Vegas beat them. I don't think that's fair to the Golden Knights. And also, Vegas, quite frankly, has won a Stanley Cup, and Edmonton has not. Yep. Now, the Oilers have gone to Game 7, but this is a hurdle that, quite frankly, I've always thought Edmonton will need to cross in order to win a Stanley Cup. And I mean Vegas, and quite frankly, I also mean Colorado. I think those are the 2 teams that in a perfect world, if you pump truth serum into the guys that have been around that long, McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, Nurse, are the 4 that immediately come to mind. I think they'd tell you they want to beat Vegas and Colorado on their way to the Cup. All demons erased, all previous vanquishers vanquished.
Yeah, it's interesting because Calvin Pickard's almost a stone-cold murder lock to start Game 1 based upon being the only goalie with a 4-0 record in the playoffs. I mean, the Oilers have now won 2 playoff series in the last 2 years with an .866 save percentage. That's hard to do, and they've done it, but Calvin makes saves that matter at key times. And all you needed to do was see the reaction of Connor McDavid after Leon Draisaitl scored here in Game 4 and going straight to Calvin. And then, Connor on Jack's Sportsnet broadcast talking after the game about, how much he loved Calvin Pickard. So I think
loved playing for him.
And loved playing for him. And you can pick up on that. That takes, with Pickard starting, that takes one of, like if you're Stuart Skinner and Aiden Hill was the guy in games 5 and 6, wasn't even supposed to be the starting goalie supposed to be Laurent Brossoit that year, and he got hurt during the series.
Which you may argue was actually a turning point, not for Edmonton, but for Vegas. The Oilers were a confident group against Laurent Brossoit. Aiden Hill got on a heater, went 11-4, had a save percentage of 93. No one had that going into the series.
No one had that, and including a 38 save performance here in Game 6 when the Oilers lost 5-2. I mean, the Oilers outshot Vegas 40-22 in that game. So, and in fairness to Hill, even last year when they got beat by Dallas, he was at .930 as well. This year, there was a little bit of a drop-off at even strength against Minnesota through the first round. So I am with Jack. I think there's full recognition of Vegas's championship caliber. They won a Stanley Cup. Those guys know how to win. It's going to be a tough challenge. They have a big, heavy, tough defense. They play zone defense as well as any team in the National Hockey League. They are disciplined as well. They have good special teams. So this is, to me, I don't think the LA Kings were pretenders in any way, shape, or form, but I do see Vegas differently on a different stratosphere than I see Los Angeles. Edmonton has to manage the puck better than they did against LA. They have to be more disciplined than they were against LA. And I think they'll have to play a lower event game. The 2 games that were played in Los Angeles this year, or in Vegas this year, 1-0 game. Shots were 28-16 for Edmonton. Edmonton got 16-2 in the third period. No penalties in either game. The other game, the Oilers won 3-2. They got 3 goals in the second period. And
without Connor McDavid.
Connor only had 1 point in the 3 games that he played against the Golden Knights this year. The only game that was atypical from an Oilers sort of Golden Knights match.
That 6-3.
6-3 game where the Oilers built up to 5-0 lead. So,
and actually, that game, I got to say, that could have gone Vegas's way just as easily. Edmonton had the better goaltender that night.
They did, and Vegas was coming in the back half of that game, and the Oilers kind of held on. Yeah. So, to me, it's going to be a completely different type of series. It is, and I agree with Jack, with total recognition from the Oilers players that this is a team that they snap you to their attention. They're well coached, they're layered. You're not going to score. The Oilers are leading the playoffs in goals for right now. You're not going to score. You're not going to be able to outscore your mistakes against the Vegas Golden Knights. You're going to have to play a better overall game.
Paige, I think ultimately this series is going to have a moment or 2 in it. And it's how the teams handle that particular moment. And Bob talked about discipline, and I thought that was an interesting comment because it's very easy to forget that in Game 5, a couple of years ago in Vegas, the Oilers were leading 2-1 in exactly the type of low-event game Bob was describing. They took a penalty. The second penalty, whether you want to say it was a penalty or not, but the bottom line is Vegas, in the blink of an eye, turned a 2-1 deficit into a 4-2 lead. and there was a lack of discipline. Granted, one of them probably wasn't a penalty, but the bottom line is you put yourself in a box, you put yourself at risk of allowing the game and ultimately the series to escape your grasp. And Edmonton, instead of flying home with a 3-2 series lead, having played a near perfect road game, having played the kind of road game they played in Game 5 against LA just a few days ago, instead, 48 hours later, they were shaking hands. I think at some point, this series will come to a similar crossroads. And it will be instructive for all of us to see how Edmonton handles the moment again 2 years wiser.
Well, I think it's safe to say that coming up is going to be an incredible series of hockey. We're looking forward to it. We hope that you are also looking forward to it. It all gets underway this week in Vegas. We can't wait.